So, Matt, a final question here. If we had you on, say, next year or the year after, let's say next year, what's the one question we didn't ask you today that we might be asking you to answer next year? Could you look a little around the corner and think about, like, what haven't we talked about today that you think is kind of bubbling under the surface that if we had you on next year, we might ask you about?
This might be a little bit esoteric, but one of the things I am a little concerned about, and I think is going to become more and more of an issue, as many public institutions, particularly in red states, have governance models that are changing, where more politically oriented regents or more politically oriented university governments steps into play. I think we've had this discussion a lot about university self-governance and what's appropriate outside interference or not in the context of curriculum, in the context maybe of DEI or admission standards and everything else. And there's a good conversation now about whether some of those are good or bad choices elsewhere. I think that will either continue explicitly in athletics, or athletics will begin to feel the impact of some of those potential decisions, which will bring in different kinds of external stakeholders. And that's, just as an outsider, that's an interesting intellectual question, but it's also something I think that has to be grappled with by universities. Like there's some research even to suggest this. Hey, if my state passes a 10-week abortion ban, or if we have political changes happening in our state where it's going to be difficult to have enough OBGYNs, am I going to be able to recruit a senior women's administrator? Am I going to be able to recruit a softball coach? Or is this going to impact my ability to recruit and retain women students and women athletes? I've heard this a little bit from some schools in Idaho about where they're trying to help facilitate insurance plans for employees in Washington state, given that there's healthcare disparities. We already see this a little bit, I think, on kind of the blue state world with cost of living. Not an easy time to go try to hire a junior staffer at San Jose State, or even a Berkeley, if no one can afford to live there anymore. And I know that I have sympathy for people in my world that are like, stick to sports. Like, I'd like to, but we do live in society. And unfortunately, other societal, political, cultural changes in higher education impact sports, not just the university as a whole. And I imagine, particularly after this election, this will become more clear in more markets.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine the tax implications of the student athletes now who will travel just like professional athletes do. And so when they play in certain cities, they're going to have to play local tax. I mean, it is just going to be a complete mess. And it makes me wonder whether colleges will say, finally, you know what? We're going to divorce athletics from the academic mission of the university. So we'll see where this all goes, Matt. It was great to have you again. Really appreciate having you on Future You.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, gentlemen.
And we'll be back right after this.